What would you do? If the only way to survive meant giving away the last piece of your dignity, Clara May Dorsey hadn't eaten in days. Alone in a dusty town that never remembered her name, she stood between two choices: accept the cruelty of a man offering warmth at a price, or trust a silent stranger with nothing to gain. If it were you, hungry, heartbroken, forgotten, would you risk believing in kindness again? This is not just a story about survival. It's about what happens when someone chooses to stay, not because they're broken, but because they're finally seen. If this story touches something inside you, I invite you to like, subscribe, and help us reach 1,000 subscribers so more hearts can find a home in stories like this one. Let us know in the comments. What would you have done? Now, let me take you back to Red Bluff, where a woman traded her fear for a future. The desert wind of Dry Hollow carried more than just dust. That evening it carried silence, heavy and aching, the kind that settled behind your ribs and made you forget what warmth ever felt like. Clara May Dorsey sat curled against the crumbling brick wall beside Claymore's saloon, her knees pulled tight against her chest. Her dress was no more than a threadbare rag, torn at the hem, stained with red clay and dried sweat. One of her shoes had lost its sole, the other was nothing but leather barely holding shape. Her hands trembled, more from hunger than cold. She hadn't eaten in 3 days, not properly. A crust of bread here, a spoiled apple there. But tonight the scent from inside the saloon was unbearable, rich, hearty beef stew. She could smell it like a memory fat. Garlic, simmered onions. It made her stomach curl into knots, her mouth fill with spit that she swallowed hard, ashamed to have. Inside, laughter roared sharp, careless, glasses clinked. The sound of boots across hardwood, but outside, in the dying sunlight, Clara was invisible. No one looked her way. No one ever did. Except him. Lucas Grant stepped out into the dusty street, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Owner of the gambling hall 2 doors down, and well known for taking in strays as long as they earned their keep. He spotted Clara, and his lips curled into a smile that had nothing kind in it. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice like oil across gravel. "Ain't you just pitiful?" Clara didn't respond. She looked away, but he stepped closer, boots grinding the gravel. "You hungry? Girls smell that stew," he grinned. "Tell you what, I've got a cot upstairs, soft enough, fire going real nice. All you gotta do is say yes." "I'm fine," she whispered, but her voice cracked in her throat. "Fine," he chuckled. "Darlin', you look like you ain't got 2 cents or a soul left. Who cares?" Lucas leaned in, lowering his voice. "Look, I ain't unkind. I feed you, give you a place to sleep, and you be good to me. That's a fair trade. World don't give nothing for free." His hand reached out casual, like he had the right to her arm, to her body. Clara flinched, stood, backed against the wall. "Don't touch me." Lucas's smile didn't falter. "Suit yourself, but you'll be back. Ain't no one else coming for a broke little ghost like you." He moved closer, thumb brushing along her wrist. Then everything changed. A shadow stepped between them. The air stilled, and the only sound was the slight creak of leather as a man dismounted his horse just a few feet away. Dust swirled around his boots. He was tall, broad, with a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. His coat, worn and long, shifted with the wind. He didn't say a word at first, just looked at Lucas. One hand rested on his belt, near the pistol, but not threatening. Just there. Lucas sneered. "This ain't your business." "Cowboy." Still, the man didn't raise his voice. His tone was steady, quiet, but firm as bedrock. It is now. Clara blinked up at him. His face was weathered, unreadable, but there was something in his eyes steel gray and unmoving that made even Lucas hesitate. "You want to draw over some stray?" Lucas scoffed. "No," the stranger said. "I just think she's had enough men grab her this week." Lucas's jaw twitched, but he backed off, lifting his hands. "Fine. Take her. She ain't worth the fight." He walked off muttering curses, disappearing into the saloon's glow. Clara stood frozen, heart hammering. She waited for the stranger to say something, to ask for something in return, but he just turned to her, gaze softening slightly. "You got anywhere to go?" She shook her head. He nodded once, then offered a calloused hand. "Name's Elias McCade. I've got a place. Not much, but it's dry, warm. Got food." Her lips parted, but she couldn't speak. He didn't rush her, just said, "You need a place to rest. That's all. You can ride with me or stay here. Up to you." Clara looked back at the door to the saloon, at the laughter and the stew, and the man who waited to turn hunger into shame. She looked at Elias again, and for the first time in a long while, she stepped forward toward something unknown, but not unkind. "All right," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I'll come." Elias helped her into the saddle without another word. His horse snorted, and the saddle creaked beneath their weight. As they rode into the deepening dusk, Clara clutched the blanket he handed her. She didn't know where they were going, or why this man had stopped for her. But something inside her, something buried for too long, started to believe that maybe, just maybe, not all strangers wanted something in return. The sun had long dipped behind the red ridges as Elias guided his wagon out of Dry Hollow. The town's flickering lanterns shrank behind them, swallowed by the desert night. Ahead, only open land stretched, the kind that made a person feel small and forgotten. Clara sat stiffly on the wagon bench, wrapped in Elias's blanket. It smelled of leather and cedar smoke, a scent she hadn't known she missed until it found her. The horse's hooves clopped steady against the hard-packed dirt, and every now and then the wagon jolted over a rut, sending a sharp jolt up her spine. But she didn't complain. The silence between them felt heavier than the blanket. She glanced at Elias from the corner of her eye, his face stoic, his hands steady on the reins. Snow hadn't touched this land yet, but the wind off the canyon still bit through her worn dress. She tightened the blanket and cleared her throat. "How far is it?" Elias didn't look at her. "Red Bluff's about 15 miles out. We'll make camp near the ridge and ride in come morning." She nodded, not sure what else to say. A few more minutes passed before she dared to ask, "Why'd you stop for me?" His jaw shifted, and for a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. But finally he said, "Figured you'd had your fill of men thinking you owe 'em for a warm place." Clara looked down at her hands. Most men don't bother seeing past what they want. "I used to be one of them," he said simply. "I didn't grow up kind. I learned fists before words." That surprised her. Not the confession, but the way he said it without pride or shame. Like it was just a fact, like rain falling. "You don't seem that way now," she murmured. "People change," he replied, "or they try to." They rode on. The desert stretched wide and silent, dotted with saguaros and pale brush that looked silver in the moonlight. Coyotes howled in the distance. Clara drew the blanket closer around her shoulders and risked another glance at Elias. He didn't fit her image of a savior. He wasn't polished or poetic. There was a scar just above his collarbone that disappeared beneath his shirt, and deep lines around his eyes. A man who'd seen things and chosen to stay quiet about most of them. "You live alone?" she asked. For a while now, No wife. He shook his head. Had someone once? She deserved more peace than I could offer. Clara nodded, though her chest tightened with the familiarity of those words. She'd heard them said about her, too, by men who didn't know the first thing about her peace or what it cost. I don't want trouble, she said after a while, her voice almost lost in the wind. If I stay, I'll help. I can work. I'm not offering charity. Elias said, I've got a house with a roof that leaks and a field that needs plowing. You stay, you work. That's fair. And if someone comes looking for me, Elias's eyes remained on the trail, but his voice dropped low. Then we'll deal with it. Clara felt something shift in her chest. Not comfort exactly, but maybe the start of it. Maybe. The wagon creaked as they climbed a narrow ridge. Below, moonlight spilled across the canyon floor, painting the land in blue and silver. In the distance, against the black horizon, she saw the faint outline of a roof. Smoke curled from a chimney. That's yours, she asked. Red Bluff. He nodded. Built by my father, repaired by my own two hands. Looks quiet. Most days, it is. They reached the ridge's edge and pulled off to a small clearing. Elias hopped down, tied the reins, and began unhooking the packs. Clara climbed down, slower, her legs stiff from the ride. He laid a thick bedroll near a cluster of rocks and added a few dry branches to a fire pit. Within minutes, flames flickered and crackled to life. Clara crouched beside it, hands outstretched toward the heat. Elias handed her a tin cup of water, then sat on the other side of the fire, cross-legged. She studied the shadows dancing on his face. You said you used to be one of them. What changed? Elias stirred the fire with a stick, sparks rising into the dark, got tired of waking up angry, of being a man no one missed when he left a room. He glanced at her, then added, Now I choose quiet over fists, silence over fire. Most days, it holds. Clara didn't reply, but she understood more than she could say. She sipped the water slowly, feeling it settle in her stomach like something sacred. It was the first time in weeks she hadn't had to earn anything with fear. As the flames burned lower, Elias stood and pointed to the wagon. You take the bedroll tonight. I'll stay with the horse. You don't have to, I know. And just like that, he walked off into the dark, leaving her by the fire. Clara sat a while longer, the heat on her cheeks, the stars wheeling above her like silent sentries. She looked toward the wagon, then toward the man who had chosen quietly, without demand to treat her like more than the sum of her past. She wrapped the blanket tighter and lay down on the bedroll, the ground firm beneath her, the fire crackling nearby. Sleep came slowly. But it came. Red Bluff wasn't much to look at in the morning light. The porch sagged in the middle. The paint had long since peeled away, leaving behind weathered gray boards. One shutter hung by a single hinge, creaking each time the wind blew down from the hills. But to Clara, standing on the threshold with dust on her boots and sleep still clinging to her lashes, it looked like something close to peace. Elias had ridden off early, before the sun had fully risen. He left no words, just a small pot of coffee keeping warm by the stove, and a folded scrap of paper on the table. Clara had unwrapped it slowly, careful with her fingers like she might tear the air around it. The note read, Firewood stacked near the shed. Stove can be stubborn, use kindling first. Chickens need feed in the morning, and the garden'll need water come sundown. Take what you need, leave what you don't. It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. She read the note twice, then pressed it flat and tucked it under the sugar tin. The cabin smelled of pine sap, and dry earth. Dust danced in the beams of light that spilled through the slatted windows. A small bookshelf leaned in the far corner, a single rocking chair beside it. There was a table with two mismatched chairs and a cast-iron stove with blackened edges that had seen better years. A quilt was folded neatly on the couch. Everything was old, but nothing felt abandoned. Clara moved through the house like she was afraid to wake it. In the kitchen, she filled the basin with water from the pump out back. The pump handle squeaked, cold against her palm. She scrubbed the dishes that had been left in the sink, 2 plates, a cup, a chipped bowl, and lined them along the windowsill to dry. Later, she swept the floor with a straw broom and dusted the mantel. Careful not to touch the framed photograph resting there, a woman with soft eyes, standing beside a younger Elias who looked the same, yet somehow entirely different. She didn't ask. She wouldn't. Instead, she found a pot and filled it with beans and salt and dried thyme, setting it gently on the stove just as Elias's note had instructed. The fire was slow to catch. She fumbled with the flint, burning her thumb, muttering under her breath. Come on, just light. She finally got a steady flame going and sat cross-legged on the floor, watching it like a prayer. Her stomach grumbled, but she ignored it. The hours passed quietly. Birds fluttered outside. Wind rattled the porch. At one point, a lizard darted across the window ledge, and Clara startled, then smiled. She couldn't remember the last time she smiled just because. In the afternoon, she found the garden patch behind the barn. Weeds had crept in between the rows, but the soil was rich and dark. A few green shoots pushed stubbornly through the dirt. She knelt and pulled weeds until her knees ached, then sat back and stared up at the wide Arizona sky. It was too big, too blue, too free. Inside, she found a stack of linens in a cedar chest. She carried a folded sheet and the quilt upstairs to the small room at the end of the hall. The door creaked open to reveal a bed with a wooden frame, a single window overlooking the hills, and a small dresser with a cracked mirror. A ceramic pitcher and basin sat atop it. She spread the sheet over the mattress, shaking out the quilt. It was heavier than it looked, stitched from scraps of faded cloth, deep reds, soft yellows, old calicos, the work of someone's careful hands. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring down at her boots, then reached for the small brass knob and gently pushed the door closed. And that's when it hit her. The sound of the latch, the way the door clicked shut, the way she turned the lock and felt safe. It wasn't a grand moment. No lightning cracked, no music swelled. It was just Clara, sitting on a narrow bed in a quiet house, with the door locked from the inside. She pressed her hand to her mouth and sobbed. Not loud, not shaking, but the kind of crying that comes when the body realizes, suddenly, it doesn't have to keep bracing for the next blow. It was relief, grief, exhaustion, hope, all tangled up and pouring out like rain after too long a drought. She curled under the quilt without taking off her dress. The fabric smelled faintly of lavender and smoke. She stared at the ceiling until her eyes closed. When she woke, it was dark outside. A faint glow peeked beneath the door. She sat up, startled, then remembered where she was. Her breath slowed. Downstairs, Elias had returned. She could hear the soft clink of metal, a spoon against a bowl. She paused at the top of the stairs, uncertain. But then he called up. Not loud, just clear enough. Food's warm if you're hungry. She came down slowly, bare feet on the cool floor. Elias was seated at the table, 2 bowls of beans and cornbread before him. He nodded toward the chair opposite. She sat, picked up the spoon. The beans were too salty, the cornbread a little dry. But it was hers. She ate every bite, The nights were the hardest. Clara hadn't realized how long her body had gone without real sleep, the kind that wasn't interrupted by fear, hunger, or the creak of footsteps in the dark. At Red Bluff, she tried. She lay beneath the weight of that hand-stitched quilt, listened to the wind brushing against the house, the soft hoot of owls in the trees. It was quiet, too quiet, and her mind wouldn't let go. That first week, the dreams came every night. They didn't always start the same, but they ended with the same heavy ache in her chest, someone shouting, hands gripping her arms too tightly, a man in a black suit saying, "She's lying, always has," her father's silence, a courtroom filled with eyes that wouldn't meet hers, the weight of being disbelieved. She would bolt upright in the small bed, chest heaving, throat raw from a scream she didn't remember making. The first time it happened, she stumbled out of the room barefoot, still caught in the fog of sleep. She didn't even realize she was crying until she reached the main room, where the fire had nearly gone out. And there he was. Elias sat near the hearth, in the same old rocking chair, one boot resting on the floor, the other tapping gently as he stared into the coals. He didn't flinch when she appeared, didn't ask questions, didn't even look directly at her. He just rose, added kindling with slow, steady movements, and coaxed the flames back to life. When the fire caught again, casting gold across the wooden floorboards, he handed her a cup of water, nodded once, and walked quietly to the porch. He stayed out there for an hour. She stood in the silence, warm in the glow, the cup cradled in her hands, and tried to understand what it meant for someone not to demand answers. The next night, it happened again. This time, when she came down, the fire was already lit. No words, no questions. And again the night after that. By the fourth night, the fire was burning when she woke, and Elias wasn't in the chair, just a folded blanket and another tin cup, resting where she would find it. It unnerved her more than cruelty ever had. This patience. This choice to do something small without expectation. Clara didn't know what to do with it. She wasn't used to being seen without being examined, or helped without being judged. She'd spent too long around people who wanted to fix her, or worse, expose her. Elias did neither. He just stayed. One morning, after another restless night, Clara came down early. The sun was barely peeking over the canyon, the air still cool and heavy with dew. She moved through the kitchen quietly, lighting the stove, setting water to boil for coffee. As she reached for the cupboard, she noticed something different. On the table sat a small, folded cloth, neatly pressed and laid atop the sugar tin. It was a handkerchief, soft linen, worn with time. Delicate blue thread wove across the corner, tiny forget-me-nots stitched with a careful hand. Beside it, a note in Elias's now familiar scrawl. "I don't know how to help, but I'm here." Clara stood still for a long moment, the cloth between her fingers, the words burning behind her eyes. She folded the handkerchief again, holding it like something sacred. No one had ever tried to offer comfort without making her feel small for needing it. Later that day, she went to the garden, pulling weeds until the sun rose high and her back ached. She didn't speak of the note, or the dreams, or the way her hand shook sometimes when the wind hit her just right. And Elias didn't ask. That night, she brought him a plate of cornbread and fried potatoes burned around the edges, but edible. He smiled faintly, said thank you, and ate every bite without complaint. Afterward, they sat in silence on the porch, watching the stars come out. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It felt like breathing. The days at Red Bluff had begun to take on a rhythm. Clara fed the chickens each morning, hauled water for the garden, and burned more than her share of biscuits. Elias returned from town once a week, quiet as ever, though sometimes she caught him watching her like he was measuring the distance between where she'd been and where she stood now. She'd begun to feel settled, not safe, not yet, but balanced, as if her feet were starting to belong to the ground beneath them, until the wagon appeared on the horizon. She saw it from the garden, 2 brown horses pulling a polished black coach, glinting like oil in the sun. The dust trail behind it curled like smoke. Her hands froze around the bucket. Elias emerged from the barn, squinting toward the ridge. Expecting company, he asked. Clara didn't answer. She didn't have to. The moment the coach stopped and the door opened, Clara felt the air shift. She knew that hat, that polished cane, that posture, as if the world owed him stillness. Judge Owen Townsend. He stepped down from the carriage with practiced ease, coat pressed, boots shining. Behind him stood 2 men in dark coats, hired muscle, no doubt. Well, he said, looking around with thinly veiled contempt, this is more primitive than I imagined. Elias stepped forward, slow and steady. Can I help you? Townsend turned to him, smile tight. I've come for Clara Dorsey. She left my household some months ago, and with her a sum of $200 taken from a locked drawer. Elias glanced back at Clara, who stood still, her face pale but unreadable. She's accused of theft, he asked. She is, Townsend replied, and I have the authority to bring her in. The law is clear. There was a long silence. Then Elias looked at Clara, not harsh, not protective, just honest. Did you take it? Clara held his gaze. Her voice was even. No, I spoke the truth about what he did to me, and he lost his reputation because of it. Townsend's smile faded. Elias looked between them. So this is revenge. It's justice. Townsend snapped. She fled in the night and took what wasn't hers. My housekeeper witnessed it. My books prove the missing funds. That's enough for arrest. Elias crossed his arms.
You bring a warrant, I bring the authority of the county court. The judge replied, the formalities can catch up. That's not how we do things out here. Out here, Townsend's tone dripped with disdain. This is a lawless patch of dirt. You think this woman belongs here? Elias looked at Clara again. There was something in his eyes unease. Maybe, or calculation. She couldn't tell. Her stomach twisted. You believe me? She asked. Voice low. Elias didn't answer right away. He looked down at the dust, then at Townsend, then at the 2 men still waiting beside the coach. Finally, he said, I don't know what you've done, but I do know this: no one drags someone from my land without proof. Townsend stepped forward, cane tapping once against the dirt. Then you're aiding a criminal. No, Elias said calmly. I'm protecting my guest. If you have real charges, bring them. Until then, turn your wagon around. Townsend's eyes narrowed. You'll regret this. I've regretted worse. For a moment, it seemed like something might break. The tension hung thick as dust before a monsoon, but Townsend, perhaps sensing he wasn't going to get what he came for, turned sharply on his heel and climbed back into the coach. The horses snorted and pawed the ground as the driver snapped the reins. The wagon rolled away, leaving silence behind. Clara didn't move. She watched the trail until it vanished. Then she turned to Elias. You hesitated. She said, I had to ask. He replied quietly. Didn't mean I didn't believe you. She looked down at her hands. People always ask. It's always the first question. Did you do it? Not what happened to you. Not are you all right? Just, did you deserve it? Elias didn't speak.
He just reached out and picked up the empty bucket she'd dropped earlier. "I'll get water," he said. "You rest." As he walked toward the pump, Clara stood frozen in place. The past had found her again. But this time, someone had stood between her and the door. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was something. The next morning came heavy. The air outside was still, the kind of stillness that made even birds hush their wings. Inside the house, Clara moved quietly, her footsteps soft against the wood, as if she didn't want the walls to hear what she was about to do. She folded her dress with care, the one she arrived in thin, worn, still smelling faintly of smoke and old rain. She placed it in a small burlap sack, along with the handkerchief Elias had given her. It felt wrong to take it, but it felt even worse to leave it behind. She wasn't angry, not even hurt, just resolved. She'd seen the look in Elias's eyes the day before. Not doubt, exactly, but the flicker of it. The pause. She'd lived too long in the pause between belief and suspicion. That's where the danger always waited. Clara stood in the doorway of the little room, her bag slung over her shoulder, her fingers tightening around the strap. She turned back one last time. The bed was made, the quilt folded. Everything looked untouched, as if she'd never belonged here at all. She stepped quietly down the stairs, past the cold stove and the half-read book on the table. Her boots barely made a sound on the floorboards. Then she reached for the door and froze. Elias was standing on the porch. He didn't move, didn't speak, just looked at her. For a long moment, neither of them said a word. The silence between them stretched taut, heavy as thunderclouds not yet cracked open. Clara lowered her eyes. "I didn't want to wake you. I wasn't sleeping. I thought it'd be easier if I just left." His voice wasn't sharp. "Just tired." She nodded. "If I stay, they'll come back. He'll come back. And next time, he'll bring more than words. I can handle myself." "I know," she said, "but you shouldn't have to. Not for me." Elias stepped forward, just once. "You think this is about charity?" Clara shook her head. "No. I think it's about risk, and I've already cost too much." There was a pause. Then he said, "I've lived most of my life avoiding the fire, kept to myself, let people believe whatever they wanted as long as they left me be." He looked at her, steady and soft. "But silence isn't the same as peace." Clara blinked. "I don't want to keep quiet anymore," he continued. "Not when someone needs me to speak, or stand, or just stay." Her breath hitched. "I don't know how to fix the things that happened to you," he said. "I don't know how to stop them from coming back." "I don't need you to fix me," Clara whispered. "I just didn't want to see you burned for standing too close." Elias nodded slowly. "Then let's both stand in the fire, if that's where this leads." For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, with a soft breath, Clara set the bag down by her feet, not because she was sure, but because for once she wasn't running. Not yet, not today. They stood in the morning light, not touching, not speaking, just breathing the same air. Sometimes choosing to stay says more than 1,000 promises. The town of Dry Hollow wasn't a place built for secrets. Dust carried stories from porch to porch. Gossip traveled faster than telegrams. And yet, for all its noise, it had rarely made room for a woman's voice unless she was echoing someone else's. Clara knew that. But she stood anyway. The town hall wasn't much, just 4 walls, a creaky floor, and a podium that leaned slightly to the left. Half the town had gathered, drawn by Judge Townsend's accusations, his polished words, and the shiny buttons on the deputy at his side. Townsend stood near the front, arms crossed, expression smug. His eyes didn't settle on Clara. They skimmed her like dust on the floor. Elias sat a few rows back, hands resting on his knees, quiet as always. Not interfering, not leading, just present. The sheriff cleared his throat. "Miss Dorsey, you asked to speak? You've got the floor." Clara stepped forward. Her boots echoed on the wooden planks. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't look at Townsend. She looked down at the small leather-bound ledger in her hand, worn at the edges. Pages yellowed. She opened it. "My name is Clara May Dorsey," she began, voice steady, though her hands trembled. "Some of you know me. Most of you don't. But you've heard the rumors." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "You've heard I ran, that I stole, that I lied." She paused, took a breath. "But what you haven't heard is why." She held up the book. "This ledger belonged to the Townsend household. I wrote in it. I recorded every transaction, every inventory count, every dollar that passed through the judge's hands, and I kept a copy." The room shifted. Quiet, but not silent. I never meant to keep it as a weapon. I held on to it because I didn't trust anyone else to tell the truth. She flipped to a page, her finger tracing lines of numbers and notes. "This page shows a fund for a charity that never existed." The next shows land deeds signed by people who'd already moved away. I didn't understand it all at the time, but I knew it was wrong. Townsend spoke then, loud and firm. "This is slander. You expect anyone to believe that book? You could have written anything." "I could have," Clara agreed, "but I didn't." She turned to the sheriff. "You've seen the recent transfers, haven't you? The ones that didn't match his court records." The sheriff hesitated. "There were inconsistencies." "And your wife worked in his office for 6 years, Clara added. "She taught me how to keep ledgers properly." A rustle went through the back of the room. Someone whispered. Another cleared their throat. Clara's voice softened.
"I didn't want to stand here. I didn't want to speak. I wanted to disappear, because that's easier than being called a liar again." She looked up right at Townsend. "But I'm done hiding. For the first time." He looked unsettled. "I brought the ledger," Clara said, holding it out. "And I'll sign a statement right here, right now. But if that's not enough, I know you'll need someone else." She turned to the sheriff. "You said it yourself. To make an arrest, you need more than a book. You need a witness." The sheriff nodded slowly. "That's the law." Clara swallowed hard. "Then I hope someone else finds the courage to speak." She stepped down from the podium and handed the ledger to the sheriff, her fingers brushing the wood one last time. The room was still. No applause, no outrage, just silence. And in that silence, Clara felt something settle inside her. It wasn't victory, but it was truth. The town hall had emptied, but the dust Clara had stirred hadn't settled. The sheriff stood by the door, thumbing the edge of the ledger, his expression tight with thought. Townsend had retreated to the far side of the room, jaw set, fingers gripping the head of his cane like it could keep the walls from caving in. Clara sat on the edge of the porch, hands clasped in her lap, heart steady but heavy. She had done what she could. The rest no longer belonged to her. Then the carriage arrived. It was old, plain, pulled by a single tired mare. The driver tipped his hat and opened the door, and from within stepped a woman. She wore a traveling dress and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, but her presence made the crowd ripple. Some whispered, others stared outright. She moved past them, unhurried, into the hall, toward the sheriff. "I heard there was a hearing," she said softly, "and a name I hadn't spoken aloud in years." Clara turned, startled by the voice.
The woman was no longer young, but her posture was proud. There was something in her eyes weathered, but bright. "My name is Lillian Morgan," she said clearly. "I was once married to Judge Townsend." A hush fell over the room like dust after thunder. "I left," she continued, "because he nearly forced my sister into marriage with a man twice her age. Clara tried to stop it. She warned us. She helped us pack, fed our horse, lied about our direction. She gave us time to run." Townsend surged forward. "That's a lie." "No," Lillian snapped, fire flaring beneath the calm. "The lie was yours, and I've lived long enough with the weight of it." She turned to the sheriff. "If you need a witness, I'll sign whatever you need. I saw the ledgers. I saw what he did." The sheriff looked at Townsend. "I'm placing you under temporary custody, pending investigation," he said. The words landed with finality. Townsend opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, the man looked small. As the deputies escorted him out, Clara didn't watch. She slipped through the side door, out into the warm light behind the hall. The garden behind the building had gone wild, overgrown with weeds, dry brush cracking underfoot. She found a bench beneath the single sycamore and sat down slowly. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt emptied. It had taken everything to stand up, to be doubted, to wait for anyone to say, "I believe you." And someone finally had. Her shoulders began to shake, not in sobs, not loud, but like a weight she had carried too long had slipped from her spine, and now she didn't know how to stand without it. Then she heard footsteps, not rushed, not hesitant, just steady. Elias sat beside her without a word. He didn't touch her, didn't ask if she was all right. He reached into the satchel slung over his shoulder and pulled out a small tin cup. "I thought you might need tea," he said, pouring from the thermos. Still warm. Clara took the cup with both hands. Steam curled between them. They sat in silence for a long while, and for the first time since Dry Hollow tried to swallow her whole. Clara didn't feel alone. She didn't need to be rescued. She just needed to be believed. The days that followed passed without rush. No more wagons arrived, no more accusations whispered through alleyways, just wind brushing through the tall grass, chickens scratching near the fence, and the slow rhythm of a life quietly rebuilding itself. Clara spent her mornings on the porch with a book in her lap, watching the sky change colors. Even the quiet felt different now, not a silence of hiding, but of healing. One afternoon, the post-rider brought a letter. It came in a cream-colored envelope, sealed neatly, addressed in careful script, Miss Clara May Dorsey, Red Bluff Ranch, Dry Hollow Territory. She opened it with steady fingers. It was from the town's new council clerk. A position had opened schoolteacher, starting in the fall. They remembered she once taught reading and numbers to children in the judge's household. They'd heard how she spoke at town hall. They believed the children could use someone like her. Clara stared at the letter for a long while, then set it down on the table, untouched. When Elias came in from the barn, wiping sweat from his brow, he noticed the letter and the faraway look in her eyes. "They're asking you back," he said, though she hadn't said a word. Clara nodded. "You gonna take it?" She hesitated. "I don't know," she admitted. "Teaching again. It means being seen. Every day. It means not disappearing." Elias poured himself a glass of water, then sat across from her. "Then let me ask you one thing." She looked up. "Do you want to?" The question lingered in the air like dust in late summer light. No pressure, no persuasion, just truth. Clara's eyes drifted back to the letter, then to the windows, to the land beyond, where the wind moved freely and nothing was expected of her. "I think," she began slowly, then smiled, more to herself than to him. "I think I do." She didn't say it for safety, or survival, or out of guilt. She said it because she meant it. Because, for the first time in a long time, wanting something didn't feel dangerous. Elias didn't smile, not fully, but the corner of his mouth lifted. "Then, that's enough." Clara folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Her hands no longer shook. Outside, the wind picked up. Leaves rustled in the sycamores. A soft hush spread across the porch, as if the house itself exhaled. She would go into town next week, write her acceptance, maybe even visit the schoolhouse, not because anyone asked her to, but because she wanted to. And that made all the difference. Spring in Dry Hollow came slow, not with a burst, but in a whisper, like the land had finally decided it was safe to bloom again. The cacti budded in soft reds, the winds lost their bite, and in the quiet corner of Red Bluff Ranch, life settled into something steady, something real. Elias rebuilt the shed behind the house. The roof no longer sagged. The door swung straight, and the old tools hung neat on the wall. He didn't talk much while he worked, but Clara knew, from the way he wiped dust from the windows, that it mattered. Inside the house, the kitchen smelled of yeast and rosemary. Clara had finally learned how to keep bread from burning. Most days. She baked extra loaves for the neighbors down the road. They'd begun stopping by more often, sometimes with jars of preserves, sometimes with stories. And every weekday morning, Clara walked the dirt path into town, hair braided back, chalk dust on her fingers. The schoolhouse had only one room, 6 desks, and a squeaky floorboard near the blackboard. But it rang with the sound of laughter, questions, and the sharp snap of spelling words called out in unison. Clara stood at the front of the room with a warmth in her chest she hadn't known she could feel again. The children didn't ask her about her past. They asked how to write their names in cursive, how many stars were in the sky, whether snakes could be milked. She answered them all. When the final bell rang, she would walk back home with her satchel and tired feet. Elias would be waiting on the porch, 2 cups of tea already poured. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't, but they always sat together. Word came, weeks later, that Judge Townsend had been formally removed from office. The investigation had been quiet, but thorough. Lillian Morgan's testimony held, as did the ledgers Clara turned over. He would not return to Dry Hollow. That chapter was closed. As for Clara, she stayed, not because she had no place to go, but because she had found the one place that didn't ask her to be anything more or less than exactly who she was. The ranch wasn't grand. The town wasn't perfect, but the people knew her name, not as rumor, but as neighbor, teacher, friend. One evening, after supper, Clara and Elias sat under the sycamore behind the house. Fireflies danced in the twilight. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and he didn't flinch. He reached for her hand, laced his fingers with hers. No promises, no grand speech, just presence, a life chosen, a silence shared, a home built not on rescue, but on something quieter, steadier. They hadn't come into each other's lives to fix what was broken. They came to stay when it mattered most. Clara's journey reminds us that survival is not just about food or shelter. It's about being believed, being seen, and being given a second chance. In a world that often rushes to judge, the simple act of listening without demanding explanation can be a lifeline. We all carry scars, some visible, some buried deep. And while time helps, it is kindness, patience, and quiet companionship that truly begin to heal. This story is a gentle reminder that choosing to stay, choosing to trust again, doesn't make us weak. It means we're still hoping, still human. No matter our age or past, we deserve to be treated with dignity. We deserve a seat at the table, not because we've been perfect, but because we've made it this far. So, if you ever meet someone like Clara, don't try to save them. Just sit beside them. That might be enough. Thank you for spending your time with us today. If this story touched your heart, we'd be truly grateful if you could like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Every click helps us bring more untold stories to life and brings us one step closer to reaching our first $1,000 subscribers. Until next time, may you always find a place where your story is heard.